Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Visible Minds, Expressions of Mental Illness in Art. This exhibition explores how artists across time have made inner suffering visible. Rather than offering a single definition of mental illness, these works show many different experiences connected to the mind: anxiety, despair, grief, trauma, obsession, isolation, and altered perception. As we move through the exhibition, I invite you to notice how artists use color, line, distortion, space, and repetition to express what cannot always be easily spoken. Our first stop is Edvard Munch's The Scream. This work is one of the most famous images of emotional distress in the history of art. The figure at the center seems overwhelmed, but what makes the painting so powerful is that the world around the figure appears overwhelmed too. The sky swirls, the lines of the bridge pull us forward, and the landscape itself seems to vibrate with panic. Munch is not simply showing a person who is afraid. He is showing a state of mind that takes over everything the person sees and feels. If you look at the distant figures behind the central form, they seem detached, almost unreachable. That detail reminds us that suffering can be intensely isolating, even when others are physically nearby. Now let's connect this to the nearby works Anxiety and Despair. Together, these three paintings introduce a major theme of the exhibition. In Anxiety, emotional distress becomes collective. The crowd is pressed together, but there is no comfort in that closeness. Their faces seem fixed and haunted. In Despair, the suffering is quieter. The figure leans against the railing, withdrawn and exhausted, while the sky still burns with tension. Munch shows us that mental anguish can appear as panic, shared dread, or silent collapse. As a group, these works ask us to consider how emotion shapes perception. They suggest that the mind does not simply look out at the world, it can transform the world. Our next stop is Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night. This painting is often admired for its beauty, but within this exhibition it also carries a deeper emotional charge. The sky is alive with motion. The stars pulse, the moon glows, and the cypress rises upward like a dark flame. There is enormous energy here, but not calm. The painting feels restless, searching, almost as if the mind behind it cannot stop reaching. In contrast, Van Gogh's The Bedroom gives us a quieter kind of unease. Here we see a simple interior, a bed, chairs, pictures on the wall, but the angles are slightly off. The perspective tilts, and the room feels less secure than it first appears. This work reminds us that the emotional strain is not always dramatic. It can inhabit ordinary spaces. It can live in a room meant for rest. Together, these two paintings show different forms of instability, one cosmic and expansive, the other intimate and domestic. Now we come to Francisco Goya's Yard with Lunatics. This work shifts the exhibition from inner feeling to social history. Here we are not just looking at mental distress, we are also looking at how society has historically treated those seen as mentally ill. The figures are enclosed in a bleak space. Some appear agitated, some vulnerable, some exposed to the gaze of others. There is no sense of dignity or care here. Instead, Goya shows fear, confinement, and dehumanization. This is an important moment in the exhibition because it reminds us that experience of mental illness is shaped not only by what a person feels, but how others respond to that suffering. Our next stop brings us to the work of Francis Bacon, beginning with Head 6 and Figure with Meat. Bacon's paintings are difficult, unsettling, and deeply physical. In Head 6, the figure appears trapped inside of a cage-like space. The face is partially dissolved, and the open mouth suggests a scream or cry that cannot fully emerge. In Figure with Meat, the body is surrounded by hanging carcasses, making the human form seem fragile, exposed, and almost consumed by its own mortality. Bacon does not illustrate a diagnosis. He gives us something more visceral. He turns the human body into a site of psychic pressure. The mind here is not separate from flesh. Fear, violence, and instability are carried directly by the figure. When you look at these works, notice how little comfort the surrounding space offers. The figures seem trapped not only in rooms, but within themselves. We now enter a section where emotional intensity is expressed through abstraction. Let's stop at Jackson Pollock's Freeform and Franz Klein's Chief. These paintings do not show recognizable people or places, but they still communicate powerful mental states. Pollock's looping, dripping lines feel restless and immediate, as if thought and movement are happening at once. Klein's bold black strokes feel forceful, abrupt, and unstable. In both works, emotion is carried through gesture rather than story. This section is important because it suggests that some experiences cannot be fully described through representation. Instead, artists use rhythm, scale, pressure, and movement to make agitation or instability felt. You might ask yourself, what does this painting feel like, rather than what does it depict? Our next stop centers on grief, beginning with Edvard Munch's The Sick Child and Kathy Kollwitz's Woman with Dead Child. These works are quieter, but they are among the most emotionally devastating in the exhibition. In The Sick Child, Munch turns memory and loss into softened forms and muted color. The scene feels fragile, almost if it could disappear before our eyes. In Kollwitz's Woman with Dead Child, grief becomes physical. The mother curls around the child in a desperate embrace, and the body itself seems overtaken by sorrow. This section reminds us that mental suffering is not limited to panic or breakdown. It can also take the form of mourning, helplessness, and the long emotional weight of loss. Picasso's The Old Guitarist nearby extends this feeling in a different direction. The bent body, the cool blue tones, and the sense of inward withdrawal all suggest exhaustion and melancholy. The guitar becomes a fragile center of meaning in a world of hardship and loneliness. Next, we come to Frida Kahlo's The Broken Column and Henry Ford Hospital. Kahlo's work is central to this exhibition because she refuses to separate physical pain from emotional pain. In The Broken Column, her body is split open, revealing a shattered inner structure. In Henry Ford Hospital, she lies alone, connected by red cords to objects that symbolize the trauma, loss, and bodily vulnerability of her miscarriage. Kahlo gives form to suffering with extraordinary clarity. Her paintings do not hide pain, they make it visible, specific, and impossible to dismiss. In this gallery, her work reminds us that trauma affects both body and mind, and the personal pain can be transformed into public expression. Our next stop is a quieter pair, Edward Hopper's Office in a Small City and Andrew Weiss Christina's World. Both of these works deal with isolation, but in very different ways. Hopper gives us a lone figure high above the street, enclosed by architecture and silence. The office is bright, yet emotionally empty. Weiss gives us a figure stretched across a field, reaching towards a distant house. The openness of the landscape does not create freedom. Instead, it heightens distance and vulnerability. These paintings show that loneliness is not always dark or dramatic. Sometimes it is spacious, still, and painfully quiet. Now we arrive at one of the exhibition's most contemporary and direct works, Tracey Emin's My Bed. This installation changes the terms of the exhibition. Instead of representing distress symbolically, it presents the traces of lived experience directly. The unmade bed, scattered belongings, and physical evidence of daily life create a portrait of emotional crisis without showing a body. The person is absent, but their struggle is everywhere. This work asks viewers to confront vulnerability in ordinary objects. It suggests that mental illness is not always distant, dramatic, or romanticized. Sometimes it is intimate, messy, and painfully real. Our next stop is Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Mirror Room, along with No F and Accumulation Number 1. Kusama uses repetition to create environments that are mesmerizing but also unsettling. In the mirror room, repeated forms multiply endlessly, making the space feel immersive and disorienting. In No F, the repeated marks cover the surface so densely that the eye begins to lose its resting place. In accumulation number 1, an ordinary chair becomes overtaken by obsessive repetition. These works help us think about mental experience as something spatial and repetitive. Kusama shows how obsession, compulsion, and disorientation can shape not just images, but the environments we move through and the objects we live with. Our final sculptural stop is Louise Bourgeois' Arch of Hysteria, Exposition 1903. Bourgeois presents a body arched backwards in a pose that feels both graceful and painful. The title recalls the history of hysteria, a word long used to pathologize emotion, especially in women. The sculpture invites us to think about how distress has been named, controlled, and misunderstood. Hess's repeated forms, by contrast, seem orderly at first, but slowly reveal irregularity and fragility. No two are exactly alike. Together, these works show that instability can appear in the body, in repetition, and in the structures we try to impose on experience. We close with Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory and Dubofet's The Cow with the Subtitle Nose. These final works turn toward altered perception and the unsettling transformation of the familiar. Dali's melting clocks suggest a world in which time itself has lost stability. Dubuffet's rough, distorted animal form rejects polish and order, making something familiar seem strange and unruly. Ending here reminds us that mental experience is not limited to sadness or fear. It can also involve disorientation, irrationality, estrangement, and the collapse of ordinary logic. As we conclude, Visible Minds asks us to think about mental illness not as one image or one story, but as a wide range of lived experiences. Across painting, printmaking, sculpture, and installation, these artists make visible what is often hidden: panic, grief, obsession, isolation, and survival. Thank you for joining this tour, and I hope the exhibition leaves you with a deeper sense of how art can open space for empathy, reflection, and recognition.